All right, let's dive into one of the most fundamental and honestly most fascinating principles in all of criminal law. We're going to explore how the exact same action, let's say taking a human life, can be viewed by the law as a heroic act of self-defense one day and a cold-blooded murder the next. It all boils down to one simple but powerful word: context. So let's just kick things off with a question that sounds like it's straight out of a movie. Picture this. Could you actually stand up in a courtroom, look the judge right in the eye and say, "Yes, Your Honor, I killed that person," and then just turn around and walk out a free person? It sounds impossible, right? But as we're about to see, it is very, very real.
The answer is a clear and simple yes. You absolutely can. And that's possible because, in the legal world, the act itself is just the headline. The real story, the part that actually determines guilt or innocence, is found in all the details, in the circumstances, the why and the how of it all.
So here's our roadmap for today. We're going to journey across what lawyers call the spectrum of culpability. We'll start at one end, where an act is totally justified and there's no crime. Then we'll look at cases where there's no blame. After that, we'll see how a penalty gets smaller, and finally, how it can get a whole lot bigger.
Okay, first stop, the justified act. Now this is the ultimate get-out-of-jail-free card, except it's even better. The law is basically saying there was never a jail to begin with, because what you did wasn't a crime at all.
So what does it really mean for an act to be justified? Well, it means the law doesn't just give you a pass. It basically says you did the right thing given the situation. You acted completely within the rules. And that is so important because if you never broke a law, then there's no crime, there's no criminal, and there's absolutely no liability, criminal or civil, nothing. Now, this is where things get really interesting from a legal strategy perspective. When you claim justification, you trigger this high-stakes, fascinating thing called an inverted trial. You're essentially saying, yep, I did it, but I was right to do it, and that flips the entire courtroom dynamic on its head. You see, in a normal trial, the kind you see on TV, the prosecution has all the pressure. They have to prove you're guilty. But in an inverted trial, all that pressure suddenly shifts onto you, the accused. You've admitted to the physical act, so the game changes. Now you have to prove you were justified. It's a massive gamble. If your justification doesn't stick, you've basically just handed the other side a confession on a silver platter. So what kind of situations qualify? The law lays out 6 main categories. The first 3 are all about protecting people: yourself, your family, or even a complete stranger. Then you have what's called a state of necessity, basically choosing the lesser of 2 evils. And the last 2 are about official authority, doing your job or following a legal order. Let's talk about the big one, the one everyone thinks they know: self-defense. But it's actually way broader than you might think. It isn't just about protecting yourself from getting physically hurt. The law also says you can defend your honor or your reputation. You can even defend your property, but there's a little catch. It only counts if the attack on your property is also part of an attack on you.
Now, you can't just shout self-defense and have it stick. A court has a very specific 3-point checklist. First, there has to be unlawful aggression. This means a real physical attack is happening or about to happen. Second, reasonable necessity. Your response has to make sense. You can't bring a cannon to a fistfight. And third, lack of sufficient provocation. You can't have been the one to start the whole mess.
And underpinning all of this is a really powerful legal idea: stand ground when in the right. What this means is that the law does not require you to run away from an attacker. You don't have a duty to retreat, which, let's be honest, could put you in even more danger. You have the right to stand your ground and defend yourself. Okay, that's enough theory. Let's see how this actually works in the real world. We're going to take a look at a case study from our source material about a man we'll call X who got attacked after using an ATM. Let's run his situation through our 3-part test. So here's the scene. X has just gotten his salary out of the machine. The next thing he knows, he's surrounded. 3 guys, and they all have ice picks. They demand his money. X tries to make a break for it, but they catch him. They beat him up, they take his bag, but it doesn't end there. One of the attackers, we'll call him A, gets on top of X, pins him down, and raises that ice pick for a fatal blow. In that split second, X desperately grabs a heavy stone and hits A in the head twice. The other 2 run off. A later dies from the head injuries. Now, in court, X never denied what he did. He fully admitted to hitting A with that stone. But his whole argument was that his actions were justified. So the entire case boiled down to one single critical question. Do the facts here tick all the boxes for legal self-defense? So let's run our checklist. Number 1, unlawful aggression? Oh, you bet. He was being ganged up on with a deadly weapon. His life was in immediate danger. That's a huge check mark. Number 2, reasonable necessity? Yes again. He was unarmed on the ground about to be stabbed. The stone was literally the only thing he had to defend himself. And finally, number 3, lack of provocation? Absolutely. X was just minding his own business, walking home. He did nothing to start it. All 3 elements are there. It's a textbook case. X walks free.
All right, so that's what happens when no crime was committed. But what about when a crime was committed, but the person who did it isn't held responsible? This brings us to our second stop, exempting circumstances. Here, the act was definitely unlawful, but the law says the actor gets a pass. It's like a robot that malfunctions and causes damage. You don't blame the robot, right? Because it didn't have free will or intent?
Now, this is a super important distinction, so let's lock it in. With justifying circumstances, the act was lawful. But with exempting circumstances, the act was unlawful. The law is not okay with what happened. The key difference is that the law exempts the person from any criminal blame. But, and this is a big but, because a wrong was still done, they can often still be sued for civil damages to pay for what they broke. The key concept that unlocks this entire category is voluntariness. The best way to think about it is like a recipe. To hold someone criminally liable, you need 3 ingredients: intelligence, freedom of action, and criminal intent. For every single exempting circumstance we're about to talk about, one of those key ingredients is missing from the recipe.
So where does the law say one of these ingredients is missing? Well, it lays out a few specific situations. Things like insanity, where intelligence might be absent, minority, or being a child, which also relates to intelligence and understanding, an accident, where there's no intent, or things like being subjected to irresistible force or uncontrollable fear, where your freedom to act is completely taken away.
Let's start with a tricky pair, insanity and imbecility. In legal terms, insanity means a person is so mentally ill they genuinely can't tell right from wrong. But, and this is the whole ballgame, they can have lucid intervals. If they commit a crime during a moment of clarity, they can still be held responsible. Imbecility is different. That's an adult who has the mental age of a very young child, say 2 to 7 years old. The law assumes they never have lucid intervals, so they are always exempt.
Next up, age. Here, the law draws a very bright line in the sand. That line is the age of 15. A child who is 15 years old or any younger at the moment they commit an offense is absolutely 100% exempt from criminal liability. Full stop. No ifs, ands, or buts.
But what about older teenagers, say 16 or 17? Well, this is where the rules get a bit more nuanced. For this age group, they're exempt only if the court finds they acted without discernment. Discernment is just a fancy legal word for the ability to know what you're doing is wrong and to understand the consequences. So for teens, it's not just about their birthday, it's about their actual mental maturity at the time.
Then there's the concept of an accident. Now, we all say, oops, it was an accident, but the legal definition is incredibly strict. To qualify, you have to prove 4 things. You were doing something perfectly legal, you were being careful while doing it, the bad thing that happened was just pure chance, and you had zero intention of hurting anyone. It's a very high bar to clear, but if you do, it's the one exemption that also wipes out any civil liability.
And finally, let's look at 2 concepts that are all about having your freedom of choice taken away. Think of irresistible force as an external thing. Someone physically grabs your hand and forces you to pull a trigger. Your body is just a puppet. Uncontrollable fear, on the other hand, is internal. It's a psychological pressure so immense it completely hijacks your brain. In both cases, the law says you weren't really the one acting, you were just a tool.
Okay, we've covered the no crime and no blame zones. We're now moving deeper into the spectrum, into the gray areas. This brings us to mitigating circumstances. In this zone, there is a crime and there is a criminal who's going to be held responsible. But the law recognizes that some things make the offense a little less blameworthy. You can think of these as a discount coupon on the final sentence.
So, to be super clear, mitigating circumstances don't get you off the hook. They just reduce the penalty. And the reason why comes back to our key concept, voluntariness. The idea here is that the offender's voluntariness was diminished. The 3 ingredients, intent, freedom, and intelligence, are all there, but the situation weakened them or watered them down somehow. This simple chart shows you exactly how it works. You have your standard, baseline penalty for a crime like homicide. A mitigating circumstance comes along, and boom, it shrinks that penalty. And, as a little bit of foreshadowing, an aggravating circumstance, which we'll get to next, does the exact opposite. It makes the penalty bar grow.
Now, just like with real coupons, not all discounts are created equal. You have what are called privileged mitigating circumstances. Think of these as your super coupon, the 50% off, no exclusions apply kind. They give a huge reduction and can't be canceled out. Then you have your ordinary ones. They're still good, they lower the penalty, but they can be canceled out if there are aggravating factors in play. When it comes to crimes of passion and emotional reactions, the law becomes obsessed with one thing: a ticking clock. For something like sufficient provocation, the reaction has to be a snap decision, immediate, no time to think. For vindication of a grave offense, the law cuts you a little slack. It allows for a short pause, maybe just enough time to process a deep insult, but definitely not enough time to cool down. And for acting in a state of passion or obfuscation, that timeline also has to be incredibly short. In all these emotional cases, the legal stopwatch is running. And now we've arrived at the far end of our spectrum: aggravating circumstances. This is where the context doesn't help the offender. It makes everything so much worse. These are the factors that add fuel to the fire, increasing the person's liability and leading to a much tougher sentence.
So why do these things result in a harsher penalty? Well, it's because they tell the court something really disturbing about the offender's character or the nature of the crime. They reveal a greater level of cruelty, planning, or dangerousness. The person didn't just break the law, they broke it in a way that society finds particularly repulsive.
Now, there is a very important rule of fair play here that you need to know. Unlike defenses, which the accused brings up, aggravating circumstances have to be put on the table by the prosecution from day one. They must be officially listed in the charging document called the information. The prosecution can't just spring these on the defendant in the middle of a trial. It ensures everyone knows exactly what's at stake.
So, what kind of things make a crime worse? Well, one big category is all about where it happens. Committing a crime in someone's home, their dwelling, is seen as a huge violation. Your home is supposed to be your sanctuary, your safe space. Invading it is a big deal. The same logic applies to other protected places, like an official government building or a place of worship. An attack there isn't just on a person, it's an attack on an institution.
Another major category is about how the crime was done. The law really dislikes an unfair fight. That's why treachery, also known as alavosia, is a huge aggravating factor. Think of it as a sucker punch, attacking someone in a way that gives them zero chance to defend themselves. The same goes for deliberately using superior strength against a weaker person, or ganging up as an armed band. These all show a level of cowardice that the law punishes more severely.
And finally, some factors are about who the offender is. For example, recidivism, being a repeat offender, shows that you haven't learned your lesson. Taking advantage of a public office to commit a crime is a profound betrayal of trust. And there's even one for obvious ungratefulness, which is like biting the hand that feeds you. Committing a crime against someone who has helped you is seen as particularly low.
Okay, that was a lot. We've traveled this entire spectrum from an act that the law basically applauds all the way to an act that it punishes extra hard because of the context. So let's just take a breath and do a quick recap of the whole journey. Here it is, the entire framework in one simple chart. For justifying circumstances, there's no liability because the act was perfectly lawful. For exempting circumstances, no liability because the actor lacked voluntariness. For mitigating circumstances, the penalty is reduced because that voluntariness was diminished. And finally, for aggravating circumstances, the penalty is increased because the offender showed greater criminality. And that brings us full circle. The biggest takeaway from all of this is that in the eyes of the law, the physical act is just the prologue. It's just the start of the story. The final chapter, the one that really matters for determining the outcome, is always written by the circumstances. And that leaves us with a final thought to chew on. If justice is so deeply dependent on context, what does that tell us about the very nature of justice itself?